Joining us now is Derek Davison. He's a foreign policy analyst. You could find a link to his Patreon in the show notes. I'm a patron of his show and all of the things he does. And you can also check him out at And That's the Way It Was. Derek, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be here.
Just 1 second, Derek. Sorry about that.
Sure.
Can people hear that or no? Derek, thanks for being here. Thanks for being here, Derek.
Sure.
We're all
happy
good
to
now.
do it.
Okay. Let's start with let's get to Iran first. President Trump has, and don't you? You always feel like you're in a movie. At least I do, even when I still say that. Like I'm in some type of like really bad like 80s movie, and like Hulk Hogan has to save like somebody's daughter or something, and
or like a Fox TV, like a Fox drama TV series or something. Yeah.
Right, and then like Trump comes out at the end, and he's just like, "Thank you, your country is very proud of you."
I do think he organizes his crises in a like May sweeps kind of way. It seems like he escalates these things and then ends them even though they haven't actually ended, in a way that you would do with like a TV show. You'd have a little arc in the middle of the season where the North Koreans we're going to go to war with North Korea, and then he fixes it and it's all over. Now we can move on.
Fixed it. He tweeted out just this morning, August 7th, if you're listening to this today, the Iran sanctions have officially been cast. These are the most biting sanctions ever imposed. And in November, they'll ratchet up to another level. Anyone doing business with Iran will not be doing business with the United States. I know, and I swear to God, we should have put this on screen. I'm sorry. My bad in the prep. But he writes, I am asking for, and he literally put this in all bold letters, world peace. Nothing less. Exclamation point. I almost feel like I could read that again. The Iran sanctions. This is Donald J. Trump, who once again is the president of the United States. And not to get like all resistancy, but I'm sorry. The fucking president of the United States. The Iran sanctions have officially been cast. These are the most biting sanctions ever imposed. And in November, they'll ratchet up to another level. Anybody doing business with Iran will not, N-O-T, all capitalized. These are my editorials. Be doing business with the United States. I'm asking for world peace. We have it up on screen now. Literally, the world peace is all capitalized. Nothing less. All right.
He's a
Derek,
special boy.
I would elaborate on that. He's a special boy. I like that line of thinking. Derek, you and I might be accused of harboring some wishes for world peace. Is he helping us get there?
No. What's happening here is, Trump has been opposed to the Iran deal since he started running for president, at least, if not before. And he announced in May that the United States was going to withdraw from the deal, or violate the deal, if you want to put it in accurate language, by reimposing sanctions on Iran. And that's what he's done here. This is the first cut of the sanctions. There's another, as he said in the tweet, there's another layer of sanctions that'll go back on in November that deals with Iran's shipping industry and its oil and gas industry, that will really be even more painful to the Iranian economy. This is probably, although the other parties to the Iran nuclear accord are trying to salvage it, this is probably the death knell for that deal, which means that the Iranians, you can basically, we're kind of on a countdown timer at this point to the point where Iran decides that there's nothing left to be gained from remaining in that accord, and then presumably restarts its industrial scale nuclear program. Now, when I say nuclear program, I'm not talking about a nuclear weapons program. They don't have a nuclear weapons program. They haven't had a nuclear weapons program since at least 2007. But they will restart their civilian nuclear program, which includes enriching uranium, mass quantities of uranium, and that is going to take us back to a level of tension over the possibility that program could be weaponized, that gets us closer to the point where some kind of military confrontation becomes likely.
So why can't the Europeans initially were quite strenuous in their defense of the deal, saying that they were going to work to maintain it. Iran's foreign minister kind of was jetting around the globe to salvage the deal. Obviously, China and Russia are active trading partners with Iran. I mean, what are the mechanics of why the deal can't be salvaged because of the United States?
So the sanctions that the United States has reimposed, and the ones that it'll further reimpose in November, many of them are what are called secondary sanctions, which means they don't really penalize Iran; they penalize anybody who does business with Iran. So if you're a European company and you want to develop an Iranian natural gas field, or you want to be involved in distributing Iranian oil, that act, or engaging in commerce with Iran, will get you cut off from the U.S. market. It'll get you cut off from the U.S. financial system, which are huge penalties. I mean, huge kind of sledgehammer penalties for any company. And the degree to which any firm in Europe stands to gain from doing business in Iran is completely overwhelmed by what they risk losing if they're hit with U.S. sanctions and can't do business in the United States. The European Union and European governments have been working on blocking measures, which are things that in theory protect European firms from the possibility that they could be penalized by the United States, and in some cases even technically on paper require European firms to ignore these kinds of sanctions and continue to operate as normal. But in practice, there's no way that they can really protect these companies, and even if they think they can, the risk that they're wrong, and even if it's a 25% chance that they, only a 25 or 30% chance that they can't protect these companies, is still too much of a risk for most of those firms to take. Mm-hmm. As you say, Russia and China will do business with Iran, will continue to do business with Iran, but they're probably going to continue to do business with Iran anyway. So the real X factor is Europe. And I don't see a way that European companies can or will be willing to stick their necks out just to get access to the Iranian market, which isn't that big to begin with and is known kind of around the world for its level of corruption and red tape and just a kind of an unwieldy place to do business anyway. So it's not an attractive market. Particularly, if you put this risk of huge penalties on them. Now we can talk about China. China has been the one big buyer of Iran's oil that has flat out said we will not abide by these U.S. sanctions. The goal of the Trump administration in November, when the energy sanctions come back online, is to cut Iran's oil exports to zero. That's why Trump's talking about these being the harshest sanctions ever applied, because even under the Obama administration, when the sanctions were really, they had a lot of international buy-in and everybody was supportive of this effort to kind of force Iran to negotiate over its nuclear program, they never got Iran's oil exports to zero. Now China has already said we're going to continue to buy Iranian oil. We're not going to abide by this. But that said, the Chinese government is also in the early stages of a trade war with the United States, and there's some thinking that their purchase of Iranian oil could become a chip in that process, that if there's a negotiation that goes on to kind of get tariffs get Donald Trump to pull back on tariffs, that could be one of the things that Iran is willing to trade away in exchange for, or not Iran, China, excuse me, is willing to trade away in exchange for getting the trade relationship back to where it was.
So two quick follow-ups on that. I mean, first, let's take it from the U.S. perspective, your best read of what's actually happening here. What is the end play of the Trump administration here? I mean, you look at all of a sudden all of these kind of bizarre and disgusting stories of the MEK, paying all sorts of officials to give, lectures to them and so on. And maybe you could explain in a second what the MEK is. It takes a much more sinister tone, because it starts to look like if they're actually trying for invasion or regime change, is all of a sudden the MEK like the Iraqi National Congress? Like, what do you think that they're actually looking at a military scenario here, or are they just sort of, arrogantly thinking, well, if we really just put the pressure and the squeeze on them, there'll be some type of civil society uprising, which, by the way, my brief editorial, there's tons of dissatisfaction inside Iran, and obviously imperial interference will only undermine organic uprising.
Right. This is what I wrote about at Low Blog today. The Endgame, there's sort of three levels of this. There's the level that the Trump administration talks about, which is what they want is to force Iran to come back to the table and renegotiate the nuclear deal in a way that puts longer term and more serious restrictions on their nuclear program, and also addresses other things like their missile program, like their activities in Syria, their support for Hezbollah and other, the Houthis in Yemen, so that kind of stuff. There's very little reason to expect that the Iranians would engage in this. It seems to be Trump trying to recreate the high that he got off of the Singapore summit with Kim Jong-un. But the Iranians have never really been interested in meeting with the United States. Like, meeting with the U.S. president has been a long-standing goal of North Korean leaders going back years and years and years. That's never been something that the Iranians have particularly been interested in. And in fact, at this point, now that he's violated the nuclear deal and made it clear that the United States is not a reliable negotiating partner anyway, there's little reason for the Iranians to do that unless they get truly desperate, and I don't think they're there yet. What the administration seems to be rooting for is, I wouldn't call it regime change because that implies a managed process. What they seem to be rooting for is regime collapse. As you say, there have been a number of protests, civil society protests in Iran, kind of on a small scale but widespread around the country, which is a new thing that we haven't really seen before. And they seem to be motivated by a general sense of dissatisfaction with the Iranian economy, which has been weak was weak long before the sanctions were going to come back online. The rial has been losing value, and unemployment is still high. People aren't feeling the benefits. They never felt the benefits of the sanctions being lifted in the first place when the nuclear deal went through, and so they're very unhappy, and they have been taking it out on the Iranian government. They have been protesting against the Iranian government. The hope, I think, for people like Mike Pompeo is that if you turn the screws on the Iranian people, and if we want to be honest about this, that's what we're doing, is we're punishing the Iranian people and trying to get them to do what we want them to do by penalizing them. If you turn the screws on them enough, then these protests are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, they're going to be so big they're going to overthrow the Iranian government. That is, it's a possibility. I think it elides the fact that a lot of times when you engage in behavior like this, you impose sanctions against another country, you create a rally around the flag effect that tamps down public dissent and gets everybody to sort of come together in opposition to this their foreign enemy. it also glosses over the fact that if the Iranian Islamic Republic system were to collapse, what replaces it is unlikely to be a friendly pro-Western democracy with human rights and that looks like, I don't know, Britain or France or something. It's as likely, if not more likely, that what you would see come out of a situation like that after a lot of chaos would either be an atomized Iran that's at civil war with itself in multiple places, or some kind of a military dictatorship, which would continue to be unfriendly to the United States, but would not have the same religious objections that the Islamic Republic has stated many times toward the possession of nuclear weapons. If what emerges is a government that's even less friendly to the West than this one is, then that gets you into the next scenario, which is whether or not these people are after a military strike or a war. There, you start to look at people like John Bolton, who, as you say, has this pre-existing relationship with a group called Mujahideen-e-Khalq, which is an exile group that began as a sort of left-wing opposition group under the Shah, but has morphed into this weird right-wing cult of personality type of thing around its leader, Maryam Rajavi.
Sounds good.
And sees itself as a government in exile. Now, you asked if it's like the Iraqi National Congress. It's actually worse. Mujahideen-e-Khalq fought on Saddam Hussein's side during the Iran-Iraq War. So if anything, they are less popular in Iran than the Iraqi National Congress was in Iraq. They have less kind of sway with the Iranian public. There's no way that this group could come to power if that's John Bolton's goal. And he said, I think, at their...
oh, man.
You okay?
Yeah, we're okay. Keep going.
All right. He
sure
said, I think, at their congresses maybe earlier this year, that the goal should be to end the Islamic Republic on the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, which was in 1979. So that puts us at next year. And if that's his goal, and if he wants to see MEK replacing the Islamic Republic as the government of Iran, there's no way to do that without the United States getting involved militarily and managing the collapse of the Islamic Republic and the transition to what comes next.
Let's talk, well, actually, just really briefly before we get to Venezuela. I've been saying and making the argument that, there's been a lot of progress made with regards to getting Democratic politicians, including, very right-wing ones, in the proper sense of that word, right-leaning ones, signed up for things like Medicare for all, postal banking, federal jobs guarantee, starting to talk seriously on the environment, these really important things. And I've been trying to sort of add to the mix a handful of things that we could at least start to itch on foreign policy, including like, the situation in Brazil against Lula and the Workers' Party and that sort of coup going on there. That's a pretty obvious one. At least putting defense spending into play. And it would seem to me that in some ways, like the idea of defending Obama's prime foreign policy leadership achievement should be a pretty obvious one. And I mean, on one hand, I guess, we'll in future conversations, we'll get back to the Iranian perspective. It seems to me that from an Iranian perspective, it would be completely valid of them to say, well, we don't care if the United States is back under rational leadership because you validated, in fact, the supreme leader's core skepticism about this very negotiation to begin with, going back to like 2013. Right. But, do you think that that's a worthy conversation, at least in Democratic circles? Like, you're coming on board supposedly with all these positions. Well, how about not destroying? I mean, if you want to just even frame it as, respecting Obama's legacy, and this is one way that we actually should respect his legacy, or at the very least, if you're serious about any type of even remote stability or progress in the Middle East, you got to try to salvage something like this and run on it and talk about it.
Yeah, I actually think that's a fair point. I don't know how big an issue, it'll be in 2020, let's say, because foreign policy isn't something that gets a lot of play unless there's a real crisis. So we have to see what things are like at that point. But we've actually seen a lot of this. The Trump effect on the Iran deal has been to bring a lot of Democrats, even people like Bob Menendez and Ben Cardin and Chuck Schumer, people who were opposed to the nuclear deal, who voted against the nuclear deal, or took their opportunity to cast a sort of empty vote against the nuclear deal when they had it back in 2015. They have come to, if not defend it, then at least to argue that what Trump is doing is not appropriate, that it's I mean, a lot of times they come at it from the perspective of, I didn't support this deal, but we entered it. We're party to it. We can't just back out of it. That goes, that ruins our credibility. Right. That kind of argument, which is probably the best you can expect from guys like that. But there's been a lot of that. I don't know. I mean, of the really prominent kind of foreign policy voices. I on the Democratic side in Washington, I think pretty much all of them have come out opposed to Trump's decision to abrogate the deal.
Yeah, I'm thinking even more, potentially proactively, like, running. I mean, running on some kind of notion of restarting it or something like that. But we'll see.